that in mind, and I will start that. Awesome.
So for goals, we want to demystify our government officials. We want to make them a lot more accessible. And sometimes when we think about government officials, we see them as like someone that's so like different from us, but they're just another person. And so we want to make sure that everyone gets to know our senator today. We're also going to learn about policy positions. So when you think about questions, think about policy positions that the senator may hold, and then can ask him questions about that. And we also want to get students more excited about government in general. So just some housekeeping, just some ground rules, just be really, really respectful. Think about, the goals that we just went over today, respect one another. We know how to do that. And one mic, so one person speaks at a time. Don't talk over one another. If you really need to say something or get something out, feel free to use the chat. And then also be mindful of other people's time. We really, really appreciate Senator Boncore for taking the time out for being here. So ask questions that will be helpful to our goals. Step up, step down. If you notice yourself participating too much, let other people participate as well and ask their questions. And also just have fun. For asking questions, raise your hand. We'll call on you. You can use the reaction button, and there you can raise your hand and we'll call on you. You can introduce yourself and then ask your question. And you can also put your questions in the chat if you don't want to unmute and ask it yourself.
Awesome. Thank you for that. So as we get to know the senator today, please ask as many questions as you'd like. So now we would like to pass it to Senator Boncore so he can briefly introduce himself and talk a little bit about his district. So we'll give it to him to take it away.
Well, thank you. Good afternoon to everyone joining. I want to thank you all for the opportunity to have this conversation today, and I hope it is a conversation because I'm not looking forward just to speaking at you guys. I want to engage and have this be the first of many conversations with Suffolk Votes. So to Suffolk Votes, to Elizabeth, Zaida, thank you for working so closely with my office to coordinate this event. I'm so proud to represent Suffolk University in the Massachusetts State Senate. The Suffolk campus sprawls across the First Suffolk and Middlesex district. From the Ridgeway Gym on Beacon Hill, to the residence halls and academic buildings downtown, all the way to the modern theater, and even to the baseball and softball fields, as well as the soccer fields that are currently in East Boston. Suffolk students and alumni have a long storied history of working in the State House. Many colleagues of mine in the Massachusetts State Senate have graduated from Suffolk. Many Senate staffers and interns that work in the building, especially my chief of staff, Maggie Randall, is a Suffolk, I guess a double ran, from Suffolk, and she was actually featured last month, I think. She's probably going to kill me for saying this, in the Suffolk Online Magazine, alumni magazine. So it's definitely an article you should check out. So beyond Suffolk, the downtown Boston and Beacon Hill area, the First Suffolk and Middlesex district really is representative of my hometown of Winthrop, the city of Revere, the communities of East Boston, the North End, downtown, as we spoke about, Chinatown, the South End, Bay Village in Boston, as well as Cambridge, and over the Longfellow Bridge, MIT, up the Riverside to the neighborhood of Cambridgeport. My areas of interest in the Senate, being previous to be joining the Senate, I was a public defender in most of the district courts around Boston. So criminal justice reform is really the reason I ran for the Senate, and something that I've worked hard to, see through in the last 5 years in office. I am chairman of the Joint Committee on Transportation. So I was reappointed to that chairmanship this year. Obviously, transportation infrastructure is critically important, not only to our economy and how we get around, but to the environment, and ensuring that we have an accessible, safe, and reliable public transit system in this Commonwealth. is of the utmost importance. So last year, I was proud to carry a $17 billion bond bill through the legislature and have that signed into law by the governor to really modernize our Commonwealth's transportation project. Prior to serving as chairman of the Committee on Transportation, I was chairman of the Committee on Housing, and I think really we accomplished a lot during my time there. Previous to joining the Senate, I was chair of the Winter Public Housing Authority, and I think that experience has really guided my legislative decisions around increasing access to affordable housing, or housing that is affordable, promoting transit-oriented development, and addressing the gentrification area, situation that we're seeing in Boston. So this year I filed significant legislation that would create a process to sale eviction records. So reduce some of the hurdles and barriers people have when facing housing. But like I said, I don't want to just speak at you. I want to speak to you. So at this time, I think it's a good time just to open this up for conversation.
Awesome. Yeah. So for the questions, first of all, thank you so much for just sharing that. And so now it's our chance to ask questions. So you can either raise your hand and we can call on you, or also put them in the chat. I have a question that we can actually start with. So your district is large and it includes a lot of different cities and towns, wards, precincts, and it's Boston and it's the surrounding areas, and it's a very diverse population. So how do you ensure that every citizen in every community and all the different interests are represented?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's creating access to my office is tantamount to being a representative. I think, we're elected by the constituents we serve. So ensuring that those constituents feel that they have access to my office really is the most important part. Boston is a very diverse community, city, and the communities within it, really tell the story of like the history of the city, the progress the cities have made, and what the future of the city holds. Boston's makeup of government, obviously, is a city councilor and a mayor. But through the BPDA process, we have what's known as community groups that are very active and engaged with all the issues happening in the neighborhood. So that's a good alternative for me to be able to talk to a group who's really concentrating on the issues around the neighborhood, having those conversations, and then having, seeing how I can be helpful. In other communities, I say well engaged in the city of Revere with the mayor and the city councilor, meeting with students just like we are, high school students, college students, and really whoever wants to have the conversation. This is my full-time job, and it's what I do.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
I also have a question. Jason can go first, actually.
Hi, Senator. Hope you're doing well. My name's Jason. I work for the University in the Office of External Affairs. Just kind of a general question for you. I was wondering what advice you would give to any person that was looking to or thinking about running for public office. Yeah,
I mean, I would say the best advice is let your experience lead. Go find the experience you want, to be the change you want to see. I got very active in political campaigns. That's how I met someone like John Nucci, who, was the vice president of external affairs, because I was a community kid, and, campaigns are a lot of fun and can be a lot of fun. Maybe not so much in this COVID era, but, as we build out of that, campaigns can be a lot of fun. But, I think when you really, when you engage the system in that way, you meet people who are of, similar mindsets, you create a network for yourself. And then, I don't think you need to concentrate completely on running for office. I think, you can get involved in many levels of government and, have another career. I mean, at some point, I think, the opportunity will meet you to seek higher office, where it'd be like a full-time job. But the majority of the good work that happens in government, and campaigns and elections is through volunteer work, and people who step up and, volunteer for this, volunteer for that, in your own communities. The neighborhood groups that I'm talking about, no one's paid to do that. They're all volunteers. So volunteering around those groups, getting familiarizing yourself with the issues in your community, I think that's most important. You should never want to run for office because you want to run for office. You should run for office because you feel like the energy of your community, and you feel like you can make a difference. And, I think for so many of us, no one like plans for running for office. So much of it is the timing of, where we're at culturally, as a city, as a state, as a federal government, and meeting that with your preparedness, your preparation, like that you're in these conversations, that you're in the rooms where people are talking about, legislative changes, policy changes, cultural changes. And I think, it'll find you in a way if you're really looking for it.
Thank you.
So I will ask my question.
Maybe I should have talked a little more at the front end.
So you mentioned that you work with transportation, and I was wondering, because a lot of the students at Suffolk are commuter students, and like transportation can kind of add up over time, especially like public transit. Do you have any plans to like help students cover those costs, or anything to, help us not spend as much money?
Yeah, no, I think, I think that's a great question. It's a question I've thought about over the last 2 years a lot. And what I really believe is that there's a lot more work to be done in transportation. Fortunately, we passed the transportation infrastructure bill last year. That's about a $17 billion investment in public transportation, in transportation generally in the Commonwealth. That, coupled with the federal infrastructure bill that's coming down the pike from the federal government, which on the high end, we could receive about 8 billion additional transportation dollars for, could be 3. We'll see what happens when it leaves the House and goes over to the Senate. I'm very optimistic about what the House will do with that bill, but I'm kind of on the fence as to what the Senate will do. So there are, infrastructure investments that are being made, but I really think there's always more to be done in creating a transit system that's more equitable, more accessible. And as we think about climate resiliency and what the future of this, like our green system is going to look like, there's investments to be made there. And a lot of that, some of that is investments in, cleaner buses and cleaner trains. But a lot of that is operational and creating programs for, people on the lower end of the socioeconomic scale. Creating programs for students. And I really think we need to shift the paradigm and how we look at public transportation in this Commonwealth. For too long, it's been looked at as like a sort of through like a business model, right? And we need to, raise so much money to deliver the public good that public transportation is. And I think that's really antithetical to a good transportation policy. We can't say that, well, ridership is down on, and it has been, right, through this public health crisis and pandemic. We've seen ridership on the commuter rail dip as low as 3%, 3 to 10% for the entire pandemic, and really not a lot of signs of it coming back. Even like the subway system. I mean, the Blue Line, I don't think has dipped below 10% ridership, but that's only, the height of it during the pandemic was like 17% ridership. So they lost 83% of their, ridership and the revenue gained from that ridership. But, we're serving a certain amount of people. And the Blue Line was, the line that runs through Suffolk mainly is, it serves so many frontline workers, right? And emergency workers. And that's why you saw the ridership numbers dip. But we'd never say, listen, like, gas, like natural gas, the users are low this year, so let's stop building that infrastructure. We don't look at water bills and say, all right, water bills are down, so let's not provide any more water. And we need to look at public transportation in the same way as a public good. So this year I filed what I'm calling the Transportation New Deal, which is really a starting point. It recognizes the initial set of policies that we must undertake to move Massachusetts forward and build out of this pandemic by modernizing our transportation system and ensuring regional equity and socioeconomic equity, on our system. And so we focused on a couple key policy areas. The first policy area that's gotten a lot of attention is a policy of making the MBTA fare free for buses. And I think that's something that would help Suffolk students. We want to see people utilize public transportation. We really don't want to see Suffolk students or anyone calling like TNCs or Ubers and Lyft, because that creates a lot of congestion on our roadways. So we also have a low-income fare program that we'd be pushing for as part of this bill. Where, just like anything else with Department of Transitional Assistance, and public goods, if people make under a certain amount of money, they'd have an opportunity to get a reduced fare on the trains and the commuter rails. I'm also proposing a fare freeze. We've seen the cost of public transit go up more than 300% over the past 10 years, right? Your train fares, your buses fares have gone up exponentially. All the while, gas taxes and the cost of driving have really not gone up at all. So when people look at that from a 10,000-foot view, it's like we're encouraging people to drive and not encouraging people to get on public transit. We're making it more difficult for people to get on public transit. And then you don't have to wonder too hard why we have worst in the nation congestion in Greater Boston, worst in the entire country. I think we're third this year, but for the past 3 years, we've been worst in the nation. It's because we're not building enough infrastructure for pedestrians, for bicyclists, and we're making it easier for people to drive. So things like that, piloting a late night service on the MBTA service. So, if you guys are studying late or you're going out, quite honestly, you can get home on public transportation because I think that's important. So, just coming at it with a different outlook. Public transit is a public good, and a reliable, efficient public transportation system is really the system we need to build out of this pandemic and create greater health and economic opportunity for people in the Commonwealth, including Suffolk students.
Thank you. We'll go to Livia and we'll come to Adam.
Hi, this is kind of related to the previous topic, but I was just wondering, in the 2020 election, one of the top issues among student voters was climate change, and especially since Boston is such a coastal city, I was wondering if you could tell me more about things that the state legislature has done to address the climate mitigation.
Yeah, so it's a good question. This past session, we passed the Next Generation Climate Bill, which would build a roadmap to greenhouse gas efficiency, to lowering our numbers and kind of setting policy goals for the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, in our buildings, in our transportation sector. The transportation sector is like a 68% contributor to all greenhouse gas emissions, in the state, in the country. So it's something we need to wrap our head around. We did that all last year, and the governor vetoed it. So he vetoed the entire bill. There was going to be no Next Generation Climate Bill. But this year, due to the leadership in the House and the Senate, before even committees were formed and in a normal cycle, the legislative session starts, there's a bunch of bills filed, committees are formed, committees looked at those bills. The ones they want to report out to the floor, the House and the Senate, get reported about favorably. It's usually a 6-month process before we start taking votes on legislation about. But, kudos to Speaker of the House, Ron Mariano, and Senate President Karen Spilka. They fast-tracked legislation around the climate. We were able to take a vote on that bill, last month. So that is the first step, I think, in setting out a map for climate adaptation management, for greenhouse gas emission goals. Yeah, but there's more work to be done, and there's really work to be done on every level of government. You see in the city of Boston with, and like you said, it's and most of my district is really on the water, around the water. So as we're developing a city, as we're building infrastructure in the neighboring towns, we really need to think about what Boston's going to look like in 20, 30, 80 years out. And we need to build buildings that are coastal resilient, buildings that can protect the shoreline and, protect more inland too. So I think, you're starting to see in the city, and you've seen it through, Marty Walsh's leadership, really, envisioning Boston out to like 2040 and what the development plans are, what coastal management is going to look like. And in the legislature too. I mean, I filed a bill this year to ensure that, every vehicle leased by the Commonwealth, whether that's, a fire truck, a police truck, DPW truck, a MBTA bus, to ensure that they're all zero emission vehicles by 2030, that we're only buying and leasing vehicles that, are, climate friendly and reduce our carbon footprint by 2030. So, I think the bill we did this year is a good first step, but obviously there's more work to be done, especially in the area of transportation.
Thank you.
We have a question in the chat, and then we'll move to Adam. So Yvette says, follow-up question with the committee work with transportation. After your final report on the RMV in January, were you surprised by the issues the RMV is having with inspection stickers and their vendor? Can you talk about a time in this work you felt discouraged and how you moved forward?
Yeah, I mean, listen, there was no worse time to be like the chairman of transportation with the RMV issue that happened, 2 years ago, and it's, 7 people were killed by someone who essentially shouldn't have a license. And the RV, I think the RMV, what we later learned that the RMV's infrastructure was such that out-of-state violations were not being dealt with in the RMV, and they were essentially being put in a closet. So what I mean by that is we had a hearing, an oversight hearing with the Committee on Transportation after these people died, unfortunately, when they were hit by a trucker. And we found out that people's licenses that were suspended in other states for violations, that information, although we were paying for a system as a Commonwealth that would kind of deliver that information to us, once that information was being delivered to us, we were doing nothing with it. And you can read about how that hearing went down, but essentially, there's a picture of me in the Globe, I think, holding up a picture of boxes and boxes that were just stacked on each other that were found like in a room, in a closet, literally, in the RMV in Quincy that had never been processed. Thousands upon thousands of violations. So, does this surprise me? I would say, it would take a lot to surprise me, having to do with like how the RMV operates. Fortunately, I would say that this isn't really an RMV problem as much as it is a vendor problem. And the vendor that they hired had some, glitch in their computer system with the software that processes inspections. And it was I think Massachusetts and 7 other states that work with this vendor have had this similar problem with the glitch in their software system. So, I wouldn't lay blame at the feet of the RMV for something they really have little control over. They've actually been helpful in, reaching out to local law enforcement, making everyone aware of the program, and like no one's going to get a fine or get pulled over for having an old inspection sticker. There's going to be a grace period. People who have violations will get more time. So, yeah, I mean, I've seen a lot with the RMV. This I would say is more on the vendor than it is the state itself.
Thank you. Let's move to Adam.
Hi, Senator. Thanks so much again for taking the time today. I'm Adam. I'm the director of the Center for Community Engagement here at Suffolk. And so we just really appreciate you being here with us and talking with us. You know, one of the things that I found in the work in the center is that this generation is energized to make change. But one of the things that I found, some students are very skeptical of government as the best place to make change. So I'm kind of curious if you could talk a little bit about maybe some of the things that you're most proud of. You've already talked about several examples, but what are some things that you're most proud of that you've been able to accomplish and that you're working on where you feel like government is a place where change can actually happen?
Yeah, I mean, I would say when I was the chair of the housing committee, you know, we know we have a gentrification problem in Boston. We know that we're losing, like, you know, generations of students, like your generation, you know, graduating from Suffolk. You know, where are they going to go? Like, where are you going to get a job that can help, like, that's going to enable you to afford to live in Boston, where the cost of higher housing is like second or third in the nation highest. So, you know, creating affordable housing options is something we endeavored to do as when I was chairman of the housing committee. And we created a bond for $10 billion to make investments and kind of offset some of the developers' costs as they develop, to ensure that, you know, 20% of the housing being built in the city of Boston remains affordable. So we can keep the pipeline. I mean, we have some of the greatest institutions of higher education in the entire country right in our own city, but we can't maintain, you know, any of their students in their, you know, first 5 years out of college. So, you know, that's one of them. The work we did to, you know, eliminate on the hands-free driving bill last year in the transportation committee, to take the cell phone out of the hands of drivers and really save lives. You know, those committee hearings were difficult. Families would come before us and talk about how they lost somebody. But, you know, one of my proudest moments in the legislature was with the gun reform bill we did 2 years ago, and the red flag gun bill. And what that was, it was really a youth-led movement or power up movement. I mean, students were, you know, they were coming to the State House and demanding action after yet another mass shooting. And I think in the Commonwealth, like, we heeded their advice, quite honestly. A lot of students just cut school for the day, came up to this rally, came into the State House and testified at the hearing regarding the red flag gun bill. And it changed. And, you know, students across, you know, the Commonwealth that didn't show up at that rally were having rallies in their schools. And, you know, I think as a legislator who's on the younger side of things, right? I work with people, like, believe it or not, like, I'm one of the younger senators in the building. But, you know, I mean, I can identify with that, and I can, like, meet students where they are and have those conversations, and I'm willing to. So I think, you know, seeing that red flag gun bill be passed, and really see the power of, like, a student-led movement. Think about all the greatest the greatest legislative wins in this country, like civil rights, voting rights to gun reform, has all been student-led. So, you know, I really think, you know, I'd love to talk more with students who believe that government isn't the best place to do that work. I mean, I think it truly is, and with conservative, you know, we're now that will benefit or to the detriment of your generation. You're going to be dealing with some of the policies that are in place. That $17 billion transportation bill is a 5-year bill. So we're going to be spending money into the next 5 years. It's going to affect how your economy works for the next, you know, 20 years. So the conversations are important to keep having. And, you know, I would just encourage students to stay involved and not be deterred, because when you know, don't take advantage of the power you have, I really think the power takes advantage of you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Jessica, you can ask your question.
Good day, respected Senator. My question is, how do you compartmentalize pressing issues, or are issues tempted to be resolved in parallel to each other? Like, how do you determine what to focus your energy on?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I'm very fortunate, very competent staff who helps me compartmentalize things. Because like there's a lot to do. Right? My day to day, I started out doing with the meeting around COVID-19 vaccinations in East Boston. And I had that update. And I rolled that into a meeting with a group of constituents to discuss criminal justice reform. Obviously, I have an afternoon session set up with senators to talk about legislative priorities. I have this meeting. I have tonight I'm meeting with a neighborhood group. So, I'm getting pulled in a lot of different a lot of different directions. But I would say that, I have my priorities in the legislature that I work on continually. And those are, they're expansive, but it's climate reform, it's transportation, it's housing, and it's criminal justice reform. And I shouldn't have said climate reform, just the climate generally. Although the policies need the reform, the climate is what the climate is. So those are my 4 areas. Just like I'm chair of the transportation committee, there's a senator that chairs each and every committee. So through engaging with my constituents and bringing my issues, usually to the chair of like jurisdiction over these issues, we can really work on deals. And the legislature isn't taking up, 30 bills a week, right? We're taking up 2 or 3 bills a week. So with enough lead time, we can have an understanding of what the bills are, think about how they affect our constituents, have conversations with our constituents about them. And then there's an amendment process on the floor, to really make the change your constituents want to see happen. Hopefully your constituents are working on the front end of these issues as the bills kind of move through the legislature. But if not, that's what our job is to do.
Thank you so much. I was wondering, may I just ask you just a secondary question?
Yes.
How do we improve the public education system so every child gets a great education regardless of income when many are suffering from home insecurity, also known as homelessness? Because it goes hand in hand in the public school system in Boston.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really great question. I think there's, when you're dealing with an issue like housing that I dealt with and making people have, ensuring that people have access to affordable housing, it does have an effect on some of the other social health determinants, like where they're getting their medical care, where the students are going to school. And, like you said, when a family becomes homeless, like it's very disruptive to that student who, is, kids are always in a like disruptive state and learning and growing. And when we make it much more difficult for students because they have to move, because they're evicted, or they, are forced into certain neighborhoods because it's affordable, and those are sometimes neighborhoods without access to public transportation, without access to quality education. There are many detrimental effects to something, like a housing issue. So to deal with the student end of things, a lot of the student funding is supplemented by the state, right? So in each municipality, there's, taxes collected on real estate and excise taxes, and that money goes to fund the school system. But not all school systems and communities are created equal. So the state supplements the education funded on a per pupil, instance each and every year. We were working for the last 30 years off a funding formula from like the 1980s that was missing large swaths of, demographics of students. Minority populations were wholly going undercounted due to their immigration status or whatever the situation was. Last year, the legislature passed the Student Opportunity Act, which changes the funding, the formula funding. I think it's like an $8 billion investment in public transportation over the next 6 years. And unfortunately, last year, due to COVID, we weren't able to fund the first, over 7 years, we weren't able to fund the first seventh of that program. But now this year, we're going to fund that. We're going to fund this year's, part of the formula. So we should see these effects. And many gateway cities, many poorer communities had a seat at the table. Boston did exceptionally well due to the Boston delegation at the legislature, which I'm happy to be a part of, and ensuring that Boston students would not be undercounted and would have what they need over the next 7 years. So, like everything else, there's some work to be done. But I think the Student Opportunity Act is really the foundation that we're going to build a more equitable educational system on.
That's great to know. Thank you so much, Senator.
Happy to answer it. Thanks for the question.
All right, so we have time for probably one more question, so I will let Catherine ask hers.
Thank you. Hi, Senator. I was wondering if you could comment a little bit about how you work with local officials, and if because of that you have an opinion on the Boston mayoral race.
Yeah, so I've engaged with, just in government. We're always at the same events with the city councilors, with our local representatives, and we have really good relationships. Some of them, Lydia Edwards from East Boston is one of my best friends, not just in politics, but in life. So we have really good relationships. We're always working with city councilors on local issues. They're sending bills up to us, and we're trying to be as helpful as we can. And, things like, educational funding, transportation funding, creating affordable housing within their communities. So as we look at the Boston mayoral race, which you don't have to look for, it'll find you. There's obviously, I think there's 7 people in the field right now, or maybe more. I know at least 4 of them are city councilors. And I have a relationship with each and every one of them. There's also a state legislator who's running for office. There's someone from the Marty Walsh's administration that's seeking the job. I'm having conversations with all of them. When they ask me for their endorsement, I'm asking them a lot of the questions you're asking me. Well, what's your position on affordable housing? What's your position on education funding? What's your position on public transit? And I think, when people are on the ballot, communities win because these issues come to light. Like they're going to have debates in public forums about the homelessness issue in Boston, about, testing in Boston for, to get into certain schools and the adverse effects that has had on students of color. These issues are going to come up time and time again. And we're really going to have an opportunity to decide who the best person is for that job. Now, I have a relationship with all of them, and they've all, I think except for 1 or 2, have asked me for my endorsement, but I'm going to let it play out a little longer. I want to see where they are on these issues and, ultimately support who I think is, going to make the city a better place to live.
Thank you for that. And I just have one last kind of wrapping up question is like, as students, what's the best way for us to engage with your office and engage with state government in general?
Yeah, I would just say, pick up the phone, write an email. If something, I hate to use the adjectives like no stupid questions, but like any issue you're having, or if you just want to know how something works, our job first and foremost is constituent servants, and making sure that our constituents are having their needs met. So if you have a question about government, about a bill, about a policy that we're talking about, or maybe one we're not talking about, I think you should really reach out to us and demand a response from us, right? Like, reach out. We get a lot of emails every day. In my current email box, I have 85,000 emails, that we're getting through. They're not all from today, but they're from the past couple of years. So, but and also like sharing your personal story. I know a lot of advocacy groups have people interested send form emails to their legislators. Those become a little bit of white noise. If we're taking up a bill, we can get 300 to 1,000 emails a day on that bill because people are just submitting a form letter. So make is a little more personal, I think is really important. But feeling free to reach out to us at any time. I mean, that's what we're here for. My staff will put our contact information in the chat box. But again, I think this is helpful too, right? Like rather than having, you know, whatever 15 different conversations, having one conversation with 15 people is a good way to do it. So, you know, let's continue this on, you know, a more regular basis, and we can expand the group, and you know, we can have more conversations. It'll be really helpful, and you know, not just informing you guys, but informing me as well.
I would just add to that, if you're doing any kind of research project at the state or local level, and you're wondering, okay, what is the state doing on climate change? Or have you taken up this issue? Just email us, and I'm happy to touch base, particularly for Suffolk students, but definitely email or call us.
Awesome. And thank you so much to Senator Boncore for coming with us and talking. You know, it's really important that, you know, our local officials are accessible and we can build relationships, because like once you have that relationship, you're more comfortable and you're more willing to advocate for the issues that you care about, and you get more involved in government once you know who your representative is, other than just voting. So we really appreciate it, and thank you to Maggie for help setting this up, and thank you for everyone for coming. We really appreciate it, and so we hope to see for all of you to join our event next week, next Thursday. We'll have City Councilor Ed Flynn coming, so it'd be really great. So thank you again, and have a great week, everyone.